I always ask my students on the first day when I teach a Middle East class, I ask them, why they chose to study the Middle East. I assume it's not because of me that I'm so charming. There must be another reason. So I asked them why, and I also asked them, so what do you already know about the Middle East? I kind of want to get a sense of, where this is going. Like, what do you know? Because, it's a hot topic. Everyone feels like they need to know something about it these days. So I asked. And if I had to collectively visualize the responses that I get from the students, it would probably be the events of one day, of this day, and then probably also this guy, and then probably, if I'm trying hard, probably a bunch of these guys too. I'm talking about all of these radical movements that they're very, very different from each other, but they really look all one and the same for the average observer in the United States, especially those who are taking my class and don't know anything about it yet. So it would probably not be too inaccurate, to say that most Americans didn't know much about the Middle East or the Muslim world before 9/11. There wasn't that much interest. But ever since, Muslims and the people of the Middle East in general have been portrayed as the bad guys, those who are intolerant, who want to kill everyone who isn't like them, who pose a serious demographic threat, should they choose, God forbid, to come to this country or have many children. What do you know? In many circles, Islam has been portrayed as the antithesis of Christianity, as an intolerant religion overall. That is intolerant to other faiths, to women, definitely to gays, a religion that seeks to dominate the world and impose Sharia law. This is this phrase that really frightens a lot of people in the United States. But what it really just means is Islamic law, just like there is Christian law and Jewish law, right? There's no real difference there. Whether we choose to accept those stereotypes that I've just described about Islam or we choose to reject them, it's pretty clear that we live in a world where there isn't much tolerance, let alone acceptance of the other. And that goes both ways, in the Muslim world towards the West, but also in the West towards the Muslim world. But it hadn't always been that way. So I'd like to take you back to a time when religion was actually a lot more flexible. I like to ask my students in the class when I teach that particular episode that I'm going to talk to you about, I ask them, do you think it's possible to be a Muslim and a Christian at the same time? Like the same person, can that person be both a Muslim and a Christian? And most of them obviously say, no, it's impossible. So I say, well, that's how we think about religion today. But there was a time when people had a different take on these issues. When religious identity did not actually close one off to other traditions. And out of all the places in the world where this happened, it was in the Middle East where it happened. Maybe that would be a bit surprising to some people. So I want to talk about this place. This is a map of the Ottoman Empire, which happens to be my specialty. Maybe that is somehow related to why I chose to speak about it today. But the Ottoman Empire emerged around the year 1300, right in the center of this map, where it says Anatolia, it's present-day Turkey, and it emerged in the western part of Anatolia. There's supposed to be a pointer here somehow, no? In this? In the center. Oh, okay, so around here, very nice. I seem to have far fewer technical problems than before, so that's great. So the Ottoman Empire emerges around this time in 1300. And the early Ottomans, they did not come out of nowhere. There was a long period. This used to be part of Byzantium, a Christian, Greek, Orthodox empire, but all of this area here for about 2 centuries prior to 1300 was a relatively loose area of different principalities and people coming in and coming out, a lot of nomadic activity, not so much Byzantine rule. And many of those tribes who settle in this area were Turks. Now, today we think of Turks as just people who come from Turkey, but really originally Turks is an ethnic group, and these are people who come from somewhere in Central Asia. That would be around here if the map continued. well, let's say Caspian Sea, so around here, something like that. This is where Turks originated from, and that's important because they come from Central Asia, from an area that traditionally used to be an exchange hub for all sorts of things. Good things, like cultures and ideas and religions, but also bad things, like diseases. Plague comes from Central Asia too, and that's not so nice. But a lot of these people who settled in Anatolia, it takes them time, several generations sometimes, to make this shift from east to west and eventually settle in this place where no one else can tell them what to do. Eventually, around the year 1300, one of those principalities, one of those tribes just becomes better equipped, stronger, and with better military tactics than the others, and starts occupying the neighboring territories and even defeating the Byzantines themselves in several battles. And that's how the Ottoman Empire emerges. These people come with a tradition of this inclusivity or accepting the other. That is the Central Asian tradition, where you have people of different religions and ethnic identities who speak all sorts of languages, and everything is fine. In fact, that's what makes life so much fun. So they come in, and when many people think about the Ottoman Empire, they say this was a Muslim empire. Yes, but these guys were Turks. They came from Central Asia. They were influenced by not only this Central Asian tradition of inclusivity, but also by the Mongol tradition and some Chinese elements, and of course Byzantine culture once they settled in this area. So they have this combination of all of these ideas embodied into this new polity that emerges here. But of course, in addition to all this approach and background, circumstances also dictated their method of governance. For the first 2 centuries of their rule, the Ottomans were a minority of Muslims governing a majority of Christians. So they had to adapt and accept the Christians if they wanted to survive. And so what emerges is this political tradition that is very open to people who are different from whoever you are. What does that mean on the ground? Well, we still have some of these structures remaining today, and unfortunately I don't have images for them, so you will have to imagine them. And we're talking about small houses of worship that served as gathering places for Muslims and Christians, especially in those areas here, in Western Anatolia and parts of present-day Greece. And those areas, in those buildings, you have essentially a place of worship that is used by Muslims and Christians together at the same time. Imagine a room where on one side you have a statue of Jesus and Mary, and on the other side you have a mihrab. That's this little hole in the wall that directs Muslims to pray towards Mecca in the same room. And many of these structures have survived to this day. So we know that they existed, and there's record for them that they were built in the 1300s. And we're not just talking about places of worship. We're talking about many other institutions where Muslims and Christians got to hang out, to pray together, to create this early Ottoman society in which there was really no inherent contradiction between being a Muslim and worshiping Christian saints, for instance. And there was definitely no problem by following one religion and being fascinated or curious by all sorts of elements of another. And this went all the way from the average people who met and interacted with others, all the way up to the heads of the state, to the Ottoman sultans, the early of whom read Greek and Latin and Hebrew texts, and yes, they also read Muslim texts in different languages. Not all of them, of course, knew all of these languages, but we have remaining libraries of these leaders of state, and we see the books that existed in those libraries. And even if they didn't read them, the fact that they had those books in Christian languages is a good indication for their fascination with a culture that was different from theirs. So this is all great and nice. The big question is, of course, what happened? Why did this alleged harmony stop, right? Because I don't know of any place today that is like that. So what happened? Well, first of all, we should say within the Ottoman context, it continued so long as the Ottomans, who are governing a large part of the Muslim world, were on the rise, and the world of Christianity was losing. But when things started changing from the late 16th century, early 17th century, and Europe was on the rise, militarily and politically, the character of the Ottoman Empire changed as well, as part of a response to these changing political circumstances. The Ottoman Empire was now controlled only nominally by those heads of state, the sultans, but effectively by Puritan clergy who fought against any signs of heresy, and whether it was propagated by Christians or by other Muslims who weren't Muslim enough for them. So that's nice. That's how it stopped. But the other important question is why does this story actually matter? What is the lesson here? I think the big lesson here is to remind us all that once upon a time, Muslims and Christians, and also Jews, by the way, not only lived together, but also worshiped together. That they not only respected the scriptures of one another, but also admired and were inspired by them. Perhaps this is really the idea worth spreading here, that yes, we can live together and we can respect one another. We can learn from one another's traditions and take example from them, because there was a time when people did just that. And this didn't happen here in the United States, where we might assume this is relatively easy. And it definitely didn't happen in Western Europe, that's for sure. Over there, there wasn't really never much tolerance for any other. And there were really too many people who died in Western Europe fighting for their form of Christianity. This happened in the Middle East. The last place that perhaps comes to mind in relation to religious tolerance. But now I also want to take you back to my own classroom. This is also an idea that we should think about, because still today, in 2015, when I teach not a course on the Middle East, but the other classes I teach, world history, when I teach world history, I talk about all sorts of events that have shaped our society today. And I talk about human rights quite a bit. And I talk about the Atlantic slave trade and the civil rights movements of African Americans here. And I talk about feminism. And I talk about gay rights, all in the context of the history of the 20th century. And whenever I mention any of these issues, and we're talking about a class of 200 and something people, there's always this murmur in the audience, as if I've said something that's just too controversial. And I notice people moving in their seats very uncomfortably. I didn't even say what I think about those issues. I just talked about them. People are moving very uncomfortably, which makes me a lot more comfortable, by the way. I think my job as a professor is to make my students uncomfortable. And the more uncomfortable they are, the better I do my job. That's the way I see it. If they're not uncomfortable and they're learning with someone who's not willing to take risks, then they're not learning anything. So I make them uncomfortable. The more they do this, the more I continue on and on. I go on and on with these issues. But it makes me think time and again, in such a big classroom, and this happens semester after semester, there are just too many people for whom tolerance and acceptance of people who are not like them is still a very, very hard concept. And this is a group of people who are sitting in an educational setting, not just interviewing random people on the street. So if tolerance and acceptance, and it doesn't matter of what and who, it can be on religious grounds, on racial grounds, whatever it is. If those concepts of tolerance and acceptance are still not too obvious to talk about, that's what they should be, in my opinion. If they're not too obvious to talk about, then maybe we need to go back to about 700 years ago when people have figured this out. People 700 years ago in a society very different from our own have easily figured this out, that anyone can live together. And maybe we need to take some examples from these guys in the Eastern Mediterranean around the year 1300. That's it. That's my idea. Thank you very much for listening.